very fortunate to be joined this morning by Peter Beinart. He is editor-at-large of Jewish Currents. He is author of Beinart Notebook on Substack and also author of a brand new book that we can put up on the screen, Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza, A Reckoning. Great to see you, Peter.
Thanks a lot.
So my typical first question is what prompted the writing of the book, but I think that much is pretty obvious. But maybe you could start off by talking a little bit about what this period has been like, the post-October 7th period has been like specifically for you and for your relationship with the Jewish community.
So one of the central metaphors in Jewish tradition is of a family, a kind of imagined extended family. We even use the term, Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, to describe all of us, even though Israel is the name that was given to Jacob after he wrestles with the angel in the book of Genesis. And so there's something very, and it's also a family that has, imagined family that has been through a lot of trauma and then experienced another tremendous level of trauma on October 7th, which was really, say, for many of us, one of the worst days of our lives. It's very, in those moments, what families want is solidarity and support. But the tragedy to me is that the way in which the organized American Jewish community, the Israeli government asks for that solidarity is unconditional support for the brutal oppression of Palestinians and now the destruction of Gaza. So for me, I think the emotions that led me to write this book were this struggle to show that I do feel a sense of solidarity and love for people that and a tradition that is at the center of my life, and yet something has gone profoundly wrong when we take that tradition and that sense of obligation to one another, and it becomes an excuse for doing just the most horrifying things to another group of people.
So you talk about how the Jewish community needs a new story. Talk a little bit about what the current story is and what are the problems with that current story and what a new story that may better serve not just the Jewish community, but the world at large, what that might look like.
I think Jewish public discourse tends to be dominated by a narrative of Jews as kind of history's permanent virtuous victims. The truth is that Jewish sacred texts actually tell a much more complicated story than that. But that becomes the one I think that is often in the kind of folk kind of narrative that exists. And then, so you hear this even in the description of October 7th, right? To be clear, October 7th was a horrifying act of violence, including against many, many Israeli civilians. But it gets called a pogrom. So what happens then is you are linking this to violence against Jews in the Russian Empire in the late 19th and early 20th century, as if basically the Jewish condition is the same, because there are always going to be these vicious anti-Semites who are going to try to kill Jews wherever they are, right? Or people say it's the worst killing of Jews since the Holocaust, right? But the truth is the conditions that exist for Palestinians, and particularly Palestinians in Gaza, are nothing like the conditions that exist in the Russian Empire in the early 20th century or during the Nazi period, because you can't understand European anti-Semitism and violence against Jews without understanding Jews as a legally subordinated group of people. But in Israel-Palestine, it's the reverse. Jews have legal supremacy. It's Palestinians who are legally subordinate, who live without basic rights. And if you want to understand Palestinian violence and you want to make sure that it doesn't happen again, that everybody is safer, you have to face that reality of the oppression that Palestinians exists for Palestinians, not to justify, God forbid, what happened on October 7th, but to understand the conditions so you can ensure that it doesn't happen again, which means responding to the desire of Palestinians to be free.
You have a quote in here. You say, treating a state as a god is a very frightening endeavor. It confers upon mortals a level of veneration that we do not deserve and will always abuse. Leibowitz called it the essence of fascism. How did support for the state of Israel, not just, broadly the state of Israel existing, but even the specific policies effectuated by an extremely far-right, I would say fascist government under Bibi Netanyahu, how did that get tied up so much with Judaism to the extent that, the ADL and other groups, the definition that the U.S. government is working with now, will say that if you criticize this state, you are actually yourself anti-Semitic?
I don't think I really I don't think I know the answer to that question. But I think it's actually a global thing that's happening now. When I look at the way some white evangelical Christians in Trump talk about the United States, it seems to be almost a parallel in which that in Trump's America, it's in Trump supporters, it seems to me, if you don't have an American passport, if you don't have the right documentation, you are worthless. Your life is meaningless. The state is all that matters, and whether you have citizenship. And I think I'm not an expert on Christianity, but my understanding is that Christianity has a message about the universal dignity of all human beings, irrespective of what passport you have, right? And I think something parallel has happened in much of the organized American Jewish community, in which Judaism's message of the universal dignity of all human beings, because Torah does not start with a story of Jews. The first, according to Jewish tradition, Adam, Eve, Noah, the first characters in Torah are not Jews. They're universal human beings, and they are symbols of the infinite value of all human life. And yet, what happens when we talk about Israel and Gaza is that the first thing that's demanded is that people accept Israel's right to exist. Jewish tradition does not think in terms of states having rights to exist. It thinks in terms of human beings having rights to exist. States are mere instruments for the protection of human life. And if they do a really terrible job of protecting the lives of the people under their control, they should be reimagined, recreated. And yet, instead, it's inverted. So the lives of the children of Gaza and the other people of Gaza are considered not to be precious, but the right of the existence of Israel as a Jewish state with a certain political system is considered sacrosanct. And to me, that's idolatry.
It's funny you make that connection, because I was thinking about that same connection too in the context of the freakout over what the bishop had to say about mercy for migrants, mercy for LGBTQ people, and how there was such a vociferous reaction against that from the right. You know, obviously the president was upset, and J.D. Vance was tweeting about it, and, you know, it was a subject of primetime programming on Fox News, et cetera. Even though, listen, I'm also not a Christian, but I do have reading comprehension skills, and I have a basic understanding of Christianity, and I know that, you know, humanity for the foreigner is kind of a key theme throughout the whole thing, even the Old Testament, New Testament, Jesus Christ, like whoever you want to look at, that is a key message. And I think Tim Alberta has done, he's I think probably done the best job writing about this connection.
Yes.
But it did actually help me to understand also the societal process that has gone on within the state of Israel. And I think, you know, more broadly, with many exceptions, but more broadly within the stridently, you know, Zionist Jewish community, that has led to this place where the state itself is sacrosanct, and that is put above even, you know, the religious texts that are supposed to be so central. You know, that really did kind of hit home for me as well.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting if you look at, Jewish religious thinkers in the early decades of Zionism, there's a great fear actually of nationalism, of secular nationalism, that secular nationalism actually that secular nationalism will undermine and threaten the kind of ethical principles in Judaism. And I think that's exactly what's happened, that nationalism has become a religion, not just nationalism, but ethno-nationalism has become a religion, and you see it in the United States, you see it among Jews, you see it in India, right, where Hindutva kind of has become a version of Hinduism or a replacement of Hinduism, in which basically the rights of Muslims now are considered to be something that doesn't need to be respected because this is a Hindu nation. It's a very dangerous thing that I think is happening globally.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I did want to ask you a little bit about some current events and Elon Musk in particular, because it directly relates to your book. I mean, you know, this is a person who has shared and spread the quote-unquote great replacement theory, which is brazenly anti-Semitic. He had to go and do penance with the ADL and go on this trip to Israel, et cetera. But routinely, you know, his algorithm on Twitter boosts, my feed is filled with a bunch of Nazis constantly amplifying their talking points, goes now and speaks to the far right German AfD party, absolutely reactionary, did what sure looked to be, in my humble opinion, like a Nazi salute twice on Inauguration Day. And yet, you know, the ADL, which is supposed to be the arbiter of what is and what isn't anti-Semitism, comes out and was like, just an awkward gesture. We understand tensions are high. Just an awkward gesture. And not just them. Bibi Netanyahu himself comes out and says, Elon's a friend of the Jew. I mean, how do we explain this whitewashing of Nazism directly from the organs that are supposed to be, you know, repelled by such an ideology?
Well, first of all, it's just sheer cowardice, which we're seeing. There's an orgy of cowardice happening across American institutions, right? People are afraid of Elon Musk and they're afraid of Donald Trump. So that's just, I think, one broader thing which is happening, which is the ADL is doing as well. But it's also because the struggle against a certain kind of bigotry, in this case, anti-Semitism, has been profoundly corrupted by the equation of a struggle against bigotry with the defense of a state. And indeed, with the defense of a state that itself is practicing state-sponsored bigotry, right? Israel's own leading human rights organizations say that Israel is practicing apartheid. So you can't be an anti-bigotry organization if you define your mission as defending a state that's practicing bigotry, right? And so, I sometimes imagine what would happen if the NAACP defined its struggle against anti-Black bigotry as also including the defense of Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Sudan, and a bunch of other African governments, right? They would be lobbing accusations at progressives all the time who were criticizing these governments for their human rights abuses, right? It would completely distort and undermine their effort against anti-Black racism. And this is really what's happened with the ADL and other American Jewish organizations since the 1970s, when they redefined themselves as Israel defense organizations.
What do you make of some of the developments that we've seen here early in the Trump administration? Even before he comes into office, they're able to secure what is at least a temporary ceasefire deal in the Gaza Strip. We see people who have just recently been able to return to their homes. At the same time, a lot of question marks about what is going to happen next. You see increasing mass violence in the West Bank, both by violent settlers, but also very much backed by the IDF. Bibi Netanyahu has already seemed to promise that they're going to go back to the war and the atrocities as soon as this phase is complete. What do you sort of make of where we are? What are your hopes and fears for what happens next?
I think that, look, obviously it was a good thing that there was a ceasefire, that some of those hostages are coming home, that Palestinians at least can get some aid in so they're not starving to death. But the trajectory overall looks incredibly bleak. If you had to ask me what I think is the most likely scenario, trajectory that we are headed on, and it will take decades maybe to be headed. But this is, unless we change U.S. policy and Europe changes policy and Israeli impunity ends, I think we are on a path towards the destruction of the Palestinian people. Not that every last Palestinian is going to die, but something analogous to what the United States did in the 19th century with Native Americans. Right? We didn't create a two-state solution. We didn't stop when we stop at the Mississippi River and say, you can have the land, right? Basically, the U.S. just continued and continued until Native Americans were destroyed as a political entity that could resist. And I think that what we are seeing is that things that we did not believe were possible in the 21st century, we believed were relegated to an earlier era in human history, are very much possible. And I don't think they will stop with Palestinians, and I don't think they will stop with Gaza, unless we can stop it through a mass political movement that can change the political dynamics in the United States. I think that's the only thing that's going, because Donald Trump is not going to stand in the way of this. In fact, he's going to applaud this. He said the people of Gaza should go to Jordan and Egypt. I mean, that statement alone should have him sitting in The Hague before the International Criminal Court. It is a monstrous call for mass ethnic cleansing. The United States has, with our weapons, destroyed this piece of territory, destroyed most of the hospitals, the schools, the agriculture, the buildings. And now Donald Trump says, oh, it looks like it's really awful there. Not that we're going to rebuild it, not that those people deserve freedom, not that they should be able to return to Israel, which is where their families are actually from and were expelled in 1948, but that they should go and become stateless refugees in a foreign country. Unless we can change the politics through a mass movement, this is where things are headed, I fear.
And I think that you are right to point out that even if this was quote unquote only this treatment was only reserved for Palestinians, obviously that would be horror enough. But to me, the implication is much broader, because once a complete genocide and ethnic cleansing is on the table, with the backing of the world's superpower and our weapons and the President of the United States saying, hey, this is the solution I want going forward, that doesn't just stay in that corner of the world. That opens up a Pandora's box of new horrifying possibilities that we really haven't fully, I mean, not that the world has ever been perfect, not that the post-World War II order has been, not that the US has been benevolent, not that we haven't fallen down, but it truly opens up a new order of pure might makes right barbarism that has ramifications for the entire world, the United States of America included.
Absolutely. You know, and I think we forget, actually, we could be entering a real new age of ethnic cleansing. I mean, there was ethnic cleansing of Armenians that actually happened in the summer of October 2023 that people don't remember so much. But countries learn from each other. Governments learn from each other, right? And they see what is possible. They see what you can get away with. And so there are a lot of governments in the world. You think of Narendra Modi with Muslims in India. There are a lot of governments that say, we have disposable populations. We have populations that are a nuisance for us and our vision of the state that we want, right? And if Israel can do this to the Palestinians, and Israel is also exporting this technology all over the world,
that's
right? It's testing and exporting this dystopic technology of surveillance and death, and it will be used it will be used all over the world to populations that their governments consider a nuisance.
Yeah, no, that's right. Palestine, Gaza has truly been a sort of laboratory for AI-driven death and destruction. The Drop Site and 972 Plus magazine both revealed Microsoft's biggest AI customer now, and this is OpenAI's partner, biggest AI customer now is the Israeli government post-October 7th. And, our own government obviously pushing huge amount of dollars in their direction and celebrating this sort of development. And so it's not just, obviously we already have nuclear weapons, we already have the capability to destroy the world, but the level of barbarism that will be enabled by these AI tools also ups the stakes just in insane levels that we can barely comprehend.
Absolutely, and in the Torah, idolatry is linked to barbarism again and again, because it means idolatry is that you don't respect the dignity of the human being. And you were referring to the woman, I'm forgetting her name, who spoke out at the Episcopal Church, before in front of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
And when I looked at her, I thought, where are our equivalents of that woman in the Jewish world? People who are willing to risk being publicly attacked, people who are willing to risk violence against them, people who are willing to risk their jobs. Abraham Joshua Heschel, one of the greatest American Jewish figures of the 20th century, said that during the Vietnam War, he could not pray. He could not open the prayer book because he saw images in his mind of children being napalmed. Where are our rabbis that are speaking that way about the fact that Gaza now has more child amputees than any place in human history? I feel like there's a huge moral absence there.
Yeah, well, you're not a rabbi, but your voice has been really important, not just with this book, but with your track record of speaking out and risking significant consequences, both in terms of your personal and professional life. So, Peter, tell people where they can get the book, and we can put the book jacket back up on the screen too. So people can see
thank
the
you.
title.
You can get it.
Yeah.
You can just get it online, any of the online booksellers, or hopefully your local bookstore. And I'm really, really grateful to have had the opportunity to talk about it with you.
Yeah, it's absolutely our pleasure, and it's always an honor to get to speak with you, Peter. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks a lot.
All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Jam-packed day. We did not, in fact, get to that promised blog about buyouts because there was just too much to say about too many other topics. But thank you guys so much for sticking with us and trusting us in this very, very busy and consequential news cycle. And we'll see you guys again next week.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.